Welcome to another Natron tutorial. In this video, we're going to be importing Photoshop files into Natron and extracting different layers to animate individual objects within that Photoshop file. Very similar to what we've been doing with the SVGs in past tutorials, but it's a little bit different in implementing it in Natron. So to get started, we're going to grab a file at pixabay.com, and I'm going to search PSD. So PSD is the file extension for Photoshop files. There's not a whole lot of PSD files on Pixabay. It's much more just pictures and stock video. But this one here that says I am vegan is a great one. It's by user ComFreak. They've released it under the Creative Commons 0 license, so it's free for commercial use, no attribution required. So we really appreciate that. And we see if we click on download, we can download a PNG image, or at the very last option is the actual PSD zip file, the source file. It'll contain all the information for the layers and the different effects that are applied to this, so we can really have a lot of customization over this within Photoshop or even Gimp, because Gimp can open Photoshop files as well. So I've already downloaded this, but you'll go ahead and download. Just make sure you don't do a PNG file, because if you do a PNG, it'll just be an image and you won't be able to animate individual parts like these little ladybugs or the leaves and things. At least it'll be much, much more difficult. Okay, so we're going to see where that's downloaded on my computer. It's in my downloads, and it is a zip file at first. So if you try and open it, you just have to right-click in Windows and go to Extract. There'll be an option that says Extract All. Or if you have 7-zip installed like I do, you can just go Extract Here or Extract to a folder. So that's what I did. I extracted to this folder, and now we see by default I'm opening it with Gimp. But you might not. You might open it with Photoshop, or you might not be able to open it at all. So you can right-click, go to Open With, and then go to Open with Gimp. Or you can open up Gimp or Photoshop and left click and drag and drop it in. And I just want to show that this is a Photoshop file, so it comes up and it has some different color spacing for us. We're going to say keep on that. And here we go. So we have a transparent background. We have this image here with lots of different layers. If we come over here, we can click on this eye and turn on or off certain parts of the visible layer. And we can see like what exactly these different layers are doing. So I'm not going to change anything yet. I'm going to keep this open. I'm going to minimize it, and we're going to bring it into Natron. So to bring it into Natron, we just read it in. We can grab a read node. We could have also just drag and drop. In fact, that's probably the easiest thing. Right when we download, just left click, drag and drop it in to our node graph down here. It'll take just a second because this is a larger file. It's like 15 meg or something. And here we have it. So it comes up nice. We can click this to check and see that our transparent background, but it looks good against black. So we'll probably just create a black constant and put on the background when we export it. And yeah, so if we want to animate certain objects here. So before, in the previous tutorials, we used like a merge node. If I hit the M key, it'll throw in a merge node. Control and drag it into there. And we can select on this merge node, we can select what part of the A pipe we want to see. So if we go to like this earthworm, it'll show just this part of the earthworm. But I'm going to delete this merge node because there's actually an easier way to do it. We can read in directly here. We have this decoder, these decoder options, which we didn't have with the SVG. And we can decode and look at just a certain image layer. So we can also see that earthworm just by clicking on this image layer and looking at just that, looking at just a certain, like that ladybug there. Yeah, so we can read in a certain part of this. But we see we have all these different layers, and most of them are just like a teeny tiny, like a version of the text, and certain files can have hundreds of layers depending on how complex it is. And so what we want to do, we could just read in. I could hit Control C right now and then hit Control V on the keyboard and get a second read node. And then we could merge these together, but that's going to be a lot of merging. So we would just duplicate this step over and over and over again. So we would read in, because we want to animate individual objects, right? So we could read in that, and then we read in on the next one. We read in this ladybug, this vegan part. Oops, but then we'll reverse that, so we have this part be the background, this part be the foreground, so we have that hole there. So we could read in individual things. I'm going to change this from that to something else. Let's change it to, I think one of these was like the ladybug. And then we could actually, that way we can move this ladybug here. I hit the T key on my keyboard to add a transform node, and then we can actually move, like this ladybug could like jump across or something, or we could rotate it and it could walk down. But the problem is we have to read in everything one at a time, because if we just read in the whole thing, the problem is we can still move this ladybug, but it creates a copy of it. So we can't actually move it. A copy of it will stay there in the background. So we're kind of duplicating. If we want to like make these leaves move, for example, we could read in just those leaves. And so, but it just moves them. Do you understand what I'm saying here? I think you probably do. So what I want to do, the easiest way that I can think of to do that, and there might be a way, I really looked hard to see if you know of a way to do this in Natron, like an object, a setting, or a shuffle node or something, so that we can actually change the object, or so we can read in everything except for a single layer. That would be cool. So let me know if you know about that. Otherwise, here's my workaround for it. So we go back into our Photoshop file, and we want to edit out. We want to have anything that we want to have animated, we want to export as a separate file. So to do that, I'm going to just turn off everything. So we go through, we turn off all these layers. And just turning them off, if we were to save right now, just having them off, they still get saved and exported. So I want to keep that one. So I think these are all the ones we can do, if I remember right. I was playing with this earlier. Yeah, and so this ladybug here is actually also part of this coloring of the grass, so we're going to leave it. So right now I've turned off everything that I want to have animated, and I've left just this nice stock thing here. So I'm going to left click and select everything, and then we're going to go File, and we're going to go Export As, and we're just going to export on the desktop a PNG image. So I'll call this vegan.png. So that should give us a nice PNG image of just everything that we're seeing here. So it's not going to be a Photoshop file. If we minimize and look at it, great. So we've got, this is what we'll import in, and now we can export the Photoshop file without this and just have the ladybugs and different objects on it. Then we can animate them on. Does that make sense? So I'm gonna take all these ones and delete them. So I'll right click and go to delete layer, or not mask. I want to actually delete the layer. To go to delete layer, right click on this one, go to delete layer. This is all in German, by the way, which is super cool. I mean, Germany's, I would think Germany's probably ahead of a lot of places in the world as far as open source goes. A lot of the free content that I look at is open source. So Natron is French, developed in France, I believe. Okay, so now I re-enabled, I returned on all of these, and now we have just this without the text. We kept the I am, that's fine. So now we're gonna save this as a Photoshop file. So Gimp can read and save Photoshop files. Some people don't know that. If we just go to save, it'll save it as an XCF, which is Gimp's native file format to save in. But we don't want to do that. There is some support for XCF in Natron, but it's not as refined yet. So we're going to go export as instead, and then we'll come down here and change it to a Photoshop file, Photoshop image.psd, and we'll call it vegan.psd. We have to change the file extension to and hit export. So now we've exported all these different elements. Now we have two things, a Photoshop file and a PNG file. We could have had two Photoshop files really, but we just did it that way. Then we reopen up Natron. I'm just going to delete everything we've done so far. Keep our merge node, I guess. I had to cut the video there for a second and restart my Natron, but we were just about to read in, so we can either read in here and read in those files, or an easier way is to just drag and drop this over. So we can left click and drag our PSD file, and then we can left click and drag our PNG file. And we'll make this full size again. So we want that to read correctly with our merge, which, yeah, that's right. So it's associated with the A. We'll have the B go to our PNG image. And now we can see everything. So we've got, if we hit the D key while this read node is selected, we can disable and see that it's showing everything on there. And if we were to apply a transform node right now, it would just transform all those layers together. We can read in on the read node directly, which is a little bit different than the SVG files. Under these decoder options, we can read in a certain object. So if we do like these rose petals, we see just the rose petals, everything else goes away. And so now we could apply a transform node by hitting the T key, and we can actually transform and move these. We could apply rotation, scale, and different things. Same thing if we were to, we can select any one object in here and just view it. But what we want to do, so we could read in lots of different nodes, right? We could copy this and just have a bunch of different, we could read this file like 10 different times and then transform them and have all these transforms go to the merge. You can have a lot of different objects, piping into a merge node. But instead, what I think we should do is just create a bunch of transform nodes. So let's go back to our read node and set it to default so that it's showing everything. And then double click the transform node. Oh, you'll notice too on my properties, right now I'm only showing one thing at a time. That's because in a previous tutorial I changed this to 1 up here. By default it's 10. And that just shows the number of active windows that can be here. So if we double click the merge node now, it shows merge and the transform. If we double click the viewer, or actually the viewer doesn't show up there, but we can do this read. So everything that we click will show up and we can scroll down. That's how it's been through most of the tutorials. But I like to have this be at 1. It just helps me not get so confused and accidentally change settings for one node because it's active and the one I really want to change was below. So you might try changing this to 1 and see how you like it. Anyway, back to this transform node. We can go down here to this output layer and uncheck this all planes box, and it gives us an option for source layer and output layer. We just keep our output as color RGBA, but we'll change our source to, for example, if we just do the rose petals. So now we're seeing it a different way. We're achieving the same result we had a second ago, but instead of looking at it on the read node is passing all the information onto the transform. It's passing all the layers, and then the transform is just filtering and saying, we only want to see the rose petal. And then we can still transform it. Hit Control Z, but the nice thing about this is, let's put this back to 0 and put this back to 0. The nice thing about this is we can now copy this transform node. So I'll put it clear over here, and then we go Control C and Control V on the keyboard, and we get another transform node with the leaves. We can tie this in as the source, and we can put this into the merge. Oh look, it went in as a mask, so we don't want that. We want the A2 to be onto the merge. So now we have our background, our A1, which is our top the most top thing being viewed by the merge node. Then A2 is the second most top thing of the merge node. B is the very bottom, and we can get A3, 4, 5. We can get lots of different things going in here. Right now they're both showing. If we double click this one, it's showing the leaf, the rose petal. But if we want to change it, we can change it to this level 3. This is all in German, so this is copy of level 3 is what this is, Ebene 3 copy. We can change that too. If we go into we can actually change the name here. We can call this level 3 instead, or we can call it Ladybug 1. So we could have done that before we exported our Photoshop, our Gimp Photoshop file. But instead, we'll have to change them in here. So another good way to do that, to keep track of what it is, so we have the Ladybug on this one. So right now it's called transform1_2 because we copied transform1. But we can call this LB1 and hit enter. Now we know that this is the Ladybug 1. And we can go back to this and see it's the rose petal, so we can call it, or we'll just call it leaf. So we've got leaf and LB1, and then it makes it easier for us to see, especially if we Control C, Control V, copy another one into here, and have this be the A3 of the merge, and then double click, and we'll change this one. We'll go down to, I don't even know, let's see what this thing is. So that's the ladybug in the top right corner, so we can just double click this and call this LB2 underscore top left, or top right. Oops, am I getting my left and right mixed up for you guys? Top right. So now we can kind of see which ones these are. And what I like to do is move this. So right now by default, since it's just importing this whole layer, the whole scene, each one of these, it puts the controls for them right in the middle. So if we were to try and rotate this Ladybug 1 right here, for example, it's going to rotate around this axis, which almost isn't too bad if we want it to kind of walk that direction. But what let's do is actually move this. So we just click here, it's the center. We can click and just change this by changing the numbers on it, or we can use the scroll wheel, to whatever number you're clicked on, play with this a little bit. Wherever you click on this, and then we'll go to the Y, is where you'll change. So you can change really fine movement, and then just use the scroll wheel to change. So now we're right in the middle of this ladybug, and we can do the same thing for this top right ladybug. We can't just move it. We need to change the center, so just use the scroll wheel to get it right where we want it to be. And that'll just make it much easier when we get into, especially like I said, if you're doing the rotation or scale tool, it'll make it scale properly. And so then we can keyframe and move these guys here. So this one's a really good example, this ladybug one here. So let's go to we'll set a keyframe on the rotation set keyframe and on the translate set keyframe. So maybe by like the first 10 frames, we want it to rotate and turn like this. That's pretty fast, but it'll turn 180 degrees, and then we'll have it at frame 10. We'll keyframe actually again, and we'll have it walk over the next 20 frames. We'll have it walk kind of down here, and maybe even rotate a little bit more while it's doing that. We'll have this be 200. Oops. Yeah, and then at that same time, we can have the this other ladybug in the top right be just doing something, like maybe it'll just be like subtly just moving a little tiny bit is all. So we go back and see what this animation looks like. We can play it. We'll see that ladybug will turn and start doing some walking around. This ladybug's moving. I guess it's moving backwards there. We could have the leaves, move and change. So I could spend a lot of time animating all this, but you get the picture. We're just reading in one Photoshop file. We're pulling out each element that we want to in a transform node. We can apply a color effect, a motion blur, any kind of thing we want to each individual element now, and then we're merging them all back together to the viewer. And sometimes maybe we don't want to have all of them merge here. We might want to bring in a separate merge for just merging in the background, or because this isn't even really the background, right? We have a transparent background going, so we'd probably want to merge this in with a constant. But you get the picture. So hopefully you've enjoyed this video and found it informative, and I will catch you on the next one.